Welcome back. It's 5 years since the promulgation of the Community Land Act to address prolonged unresolved historical land injustices. What is the progress so far? Tonight we look at the Community Land Act and community land in general. Good evening, I'm Abubakar Abdullahi. Let's get to our panel discussion for the night. Just a reminder of who our guests are tonight. Mali Ole Kaunga is the founder and director of Impact. Tia Galgalo is the Commissioner and National Lands Commission. Jaso Moku is the CEO of the Pastoralist Parliamentary Group. Eileen Wakesho is joining us virtually. She is a Community Land Protection Advisor. Good evening. Thank you all for making time for us tonight on TV47. All right, Tia, probably I can start with you. When we talk of community land for purpose of context and understanding, what are we talking about?
My name is Commissioner Tia Galgalo. Issue of community land is basically land that is owned by, that is inhabited by communities. Basically, when we talk about communities, are communities in the real name, where we are saying that we have indigenous communities living in different parts of this country. Like, for example, in Isiolo, we have communities around all over, say especially in pastoral areas. So this land is land basically used for pasture, especially nomadic pastoralism. And it's land that has not been registered in Kenya, because there are 3/4 of land that is owned, that we have in Kenya, is basically areas that is basically for pastoralism and areas that we are using for our livelihood. And those are the areas for the community land that we are talking about.
But the ownership of this land is to the community, isn't it?
Yes, it's to those respective communities in those areas. And previously, this land was held in trust by the county councils, previous county councils, and now by county governments, respective county governments, yeah.
All right, let me bring in Mali to the discussion. In 2016, Parliament enacted into law the Community Land Act, which provided a framework for recognition. Tia talks of the land initially being trusteeship that was held by the county councils, but this new law seemingly suggests as though the land should be registered, is it?
Yeah, that's very correct in the sense that these are land that are collectively owned by a community, in the sense that they are groups of people or individuals connected by ethnicity, culture, heritage, and all those. But also in some circumstances, people have lived together for a while. There are areas where we've got different kind of communities. But also in terms of, there have been a number of struggles in Kenya with issues to be with around land and natural resources. And I think in Kenya, based on the Constitution 2010, it paved the way for community, a new way of ownership of land, in which respect it gives, for the first time, communities a right of ownership, secure their rights, customary rights, but also significant control of those natural resources within that land. So it requires that the former trust land under the old constitution and the group ranches that mainly there are different sort of ownership are now supposed to be transitioning. There's a process which communities must undergo, identifying the boundaries, electing their own CLSMs, community land management committees. We have community assemblies, and then they launch their certain structural process that they must undergo, and then lodge this document with the community land registrars, and then the ministry issues them with the community titles. So there's a set process, but there are a number of issues that are still not very clear and to the community themselves. But also, there are a number of things happening in tandem. The devolution is new. Counties are structuring themselves in a way that they are still pursuing certain. Most counties are not fully devolved to the extent that they are able to articulate their roles independently.
All right, and let me interject you there because we will come to the role of the county governments in the community land. But let me bring in Jaso to the discussion. We are talking of 5 years. Earlier on in my preamble, I talked of 2016 being the enactment of this particular act. In your own view, how would you assess the implementation of that act?
Thank you. Just before I go into the implementation, to give you a summary of what they have said, the objective of the Community Land Act is actually, it has 4 main objectives. That's why it was enacted as a legal framework. Both Mali and Honorable Tia has referred to that. One was to give effect to an article in the Constitution after the land has been classified between the community, the public, and private. It's give Article 63 effect so that it is operational. This law also provides for recognition of the indigenous communities' land in Kenya which are not registered. It also provides the basis for identification of where those lands are. And it also provides the framework for registering those land so that the communities can now legally have titles like either private, like normally private land has. And there a very clear role for the county government. In terms of progress that we have now made, I think we've made some progress in terms of communities and actors understanding the law. There has been some public education, sensitization of understanding the law itself and also the rights of communities that is provided within that law. National government has also set up, especially the Ministry of Land, has set up a task force, a national committee that that is responsible for implementation of the law. This has happened at the national level. At community level, the communities have organized themselves to prepare for registration of their land so that they can put their claims. One of the progress that we have made is that the national government, the ministry has appointed registrars for several, nearly almost all the 24 counties that are where community lands can be found. And on the ground, the county government has submitted inventories of all, in some, almost 12 counties have submitted inventories for unregistered community land that is in their custody for the purpose of preparing for the registration. And communities have also organized themselves and set up structures and system for them to be able to register land. For example, some communities have prepared their community register. They have developed some bylaws. They have also drawn sketch maps for their area, for their territory, that they know that this land belongs to them.
Fair enough.
So those are the progress so far we have made. There are few communities, I think maximum of 10, that so far has got the title, especially the ones which are there are 2 groups who are transitioning. The ones, as you know, the Community Land Act repealed two laws, Group Ranches Act and Trust Land Act. The ones for group ranches, some communities have made transition and they have now got their titles. The ones under under trust land are still in the transition. None of them have achieved or have got their titles yet. They're still making.
Let me interject you there. We will come to why the transition. 5 communities, you say, on former group ranches to community land and received their titles so far. Nonetheless, let me bring in Eileen Wakesho, Community Land Protection Advisor. 5 years of this act. I was reading earlier on of critics saying that this act has not been widely publicized. You view it that way as well?
I think yes. I agree that there's been quite some good progress. But I think the question that we need to ask is whether the progress is adequate. When we talk about 5 years down the line, and we're talking of only about 10 communities that have transitioned, yet we have thousands of communities that are still waiting to be able to hold the title and feel that indeed their land is secure. And so for me, I think that number is still on the lower side. And I think there's much more that needs to be done for communities to be able to know the law, use this law, and walk through a process that enables them to secure their land and register it. Because the object of the law, as well articulated earlier, is to, one, recognize the rights that communities have, and then provide a framework for them to be able to register this land. Before they go through that process of registration and hold that document, they still would, they're still vulnerable to displacements, lack of compensation in cases of compulsory acquisition. And so I think there's need for us to move with speed to be able to ensure that more communities have their land secured. Thank you.
All right, Honorable Tia Galgalo, Kenya's 2010 constitution promulgated the devolved unit of governance, which begs the question, what role do the counties have in respect to community land?
Yeah, I think as I said earlier, the county government is holding in trust and registered community land in all areas, that is different counties, especially those who are, as I said before, that the former county council and now the current county government hold in trust all unregistered community land to date. They also have, they also ensure that transaction on unregistered community land are undertaken in accordance with the Act, just to ensure that that happens. And especially on when, for example, there's a compulsory acquisition of land, the county government supposed to hold in trust the monies payable for compulsory acquisition of unregistered community land and their interest on behalf of the community. I think we've not seen that happen in any of the communities, especially where acquisition is done so far, and I think that's the biggest concern now for all of us, because the moment we visit some of these communities, they are saying that quite a big chunk of land have been taken for government development program, and yet no money has been deposited on behalf of the community as indicated in the Act. They're also supposed to submit inventory of unregistered community land to the cabinet secretary for registration of community land. So far, quite a number of communities have not submitted through the county government. Some have done direct to the cabinet secretary, hence delaying the process of registration. Of course, the county government is supposed to do a prepare a comprehensive adjudication program in consultation with the cabinet secretary and communities. This is also quite low so far because of budgetary allocation, and many counties have not seen that one fit enough really to put money aside to be able to actualize the Community Land Act. Finally, I think maybe also the issue of approval of fiscal development for community land, especially doing the planning, the surveying and all that kind of stuff. They're supposed to ensure that at least their technical staff are adequately prepared for this. And many of the counties that, especially for the northern Kenya, they don't even have technical people who have that kind of skill, so they over-rely in other counties, and they are quite very few. So even actualizing that is also becoming a problem.
All right, let me bring in Mali to the discussion. We are talking of the role of the county governments. If they are to hold this land in trust of communities who own, as earlier on you said, this land, surely one will say there are questions of mistrust and misappropriation of lands just because the county government is holding trust for that land, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that this will be the question of mistrust, but also I think it's a question of a jungling ball. They are doing so many other things, but also at the same time, I don't think they will be losing, because if the community not register their land, then they revert back to the county government. So I don't think they're in a hurry, to me, politically speaking. So so that's the highest risk. This time frame set for transition, and if they don't do, most of these things, and the losers are actually gonna be the communities. A good examples will be cited in areas, for instance, where there are large investment programs. For instance, you can talk about Lake Turkana, the power line from Moyale to Suswa, or from Loyangalani, to where communities that had titles were compensated. But where in case a community has no legal title or recognition of that land, then the county government will set up an interest earning account and hold money in trust with the community up to until the time that the community will have acquired their title. So you see, in essence, communities that are at a very high risk, but also there are quite a number of things that you realize, and I think that also that is what's called holding counties. We are dealing with areas that are highly volatile in terms of natural resource-based conflicts, to the extent that governments, county governments are being led by politicians. They need votes from both all this. So we've seen areas where there are different ethnic communities. There are contestations on what names the land should be given, where the boundaries should pass. And these are genuine things that requires much more. It is not about the law. It's about how you organize, engage, and actually dialogue around these issues along with the communities.
Fair enough. Just so we are talking of land, community land, and quite often in these debates there is the question of ASAL and marginalized people and communities who own pieces of land whose voices often is not heard in this debate. How can their voices be enhanced?
Thank you. I think I'll come to that, but just add one point to what Malia said. And this is the point about transfer of power. This Community Land Act is the framework actually is meant to transfer the administration and management of the community land to the communities. Both the national and county government, if you look at the level of performance in terms of implementation of this act, as Elena said, is low because both of them are very reluctant in terms of transferring that power to the communities.
Both of them, you mean the national
and county government? And both county government. I can give you an evidence, like none of them so far, even for the progress we have done for the 10 that have made transition, is all on donation. There's no budget that is provided by both national and even county government to show commitment that this act is implemented as it's required of them. And I think there is that reluctance in terms of transferring that power from the system which currently exists to the new one which is envisaged by the Land Act. Coming to your question about ASAL and marginalized, this land, the community land, the bulk of it, the majority of all the biggest portion of all the community land is in this area, and one of the challenge of the process is getting these communities to participate because of the nature of remoteness of where they live, the question about access they have to the system, and all this is part of the thing that keeps the engagement between the communities and government very low. And it is the civil society, NGOs, who are trying to do what ideally is supposed to be the government role, what government is supposed to have been envisaged to do. For example, public education, sensitization, helping communities understand the load. The national government is supposed to roll out the national curriculum and also the program about that education 12 months after the act. They have not done it up to now. It's the NGOs that are collecting these small bits of information and giving it to the communities. And county government is supposed to coordinate all this. But they are actually invited by civil society organizations to work on this instead of them taking center stage, managing this process and ensuring that the law is implemented as required of both levels of government.
Fair enough.
That element of ASAL, aridity of the area and remoteness of where the communities are, some of them are nomadic pastoralists, and they struggle with their own life, and there isn't that proactive mechanism in place for government and both county and national government to reach out to communities really to take this forward.
All right, let me bring in Eileen to the discussion. I want you to comment on the question of marginalized and vulnerable people, but also the question of, we are talking of community land. Someone may be wondering, is this community land, can it be converted, be it to private or public land?
Thank you, Abu Bakar. As I do that, allow me to comment on the role of county governments in just a minute. Mm-hmm. You know, when we talk about county governments being trustees, trusteeship does not result to ownership. And so when I give you my phone to hold it for me, you're not the owner of that phone. When I come back, then you give me back the phone. Uh-huh. When we reflect on how the defunct county councils managed community lands then that gives us jittery and it makes us ask whether the current trustees can be trusted with managing community lands before they are then handed over to communities. That's why we are keen to see communities go through the registration so that this role of trusteeship ceases to exist. And then when we reflect on aspects of minority, for me, I would want to reflect on the role of women, because communities have men and women. Mm-hmm. And land has largely been dominated, land ownership has largely been dominated by men. But the good thing about the Community Land Act is it provides for equality for both women and men to be included as members. This is a complete shift from how, say, group ranches were managed before, where membership was a preserve of men, leadership was a preserve of men. Now, with transitioning and registration of community land, we're going to see women take leadership positions through the community land management committees. We're going to see women included as members and so rightful owners of these lands because of membership being equal to women, to men and women. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's lots of positive things about this law. I think the missing link is how do we ensure that we move with speed, but even as we move with speed, we ensure accuracy and we ensure that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past.
Maybe, Babu, just to add on to Eileen's question about conversion.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, the law allows conversion on either side, but for Community Land Act, for the community land, the conversion between community land and private land, there is no straight, it doesn't happen like that. Uh-huh. What happens is that if the pieces of community land need to be converted to private, it has first to go public. Mm-hmm. So that the communities can now negotiate with the government or county government and be able now for it to be handed over to National Land Commission as a public, and then from there, then it can be privatized. But the conversion is not straight from community land to private land. But between private land and between public land and community land, the conversion can be either way. And there are procedures, very clear procedures to both of them.
And I suppose the members of the community are involved in ratifying that conversion, is it?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
But I think also, as you speak,
all right,
there are public lands within, there are public utilities or public lands within community lands, as we speak as well. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right, Mali, I'll give you a chance, Tia, but let me ask Mali this. We are talking of land which often has been described as a very emotive issue. We see often, and through the news and through realities in our own societies, people from the same family fight over land, which begs the question, how can communities unanimously agree what is theirs and what is not theirs?
Mm-hmm. I think the community land actually offers some of the solutions, mm-hmm. to the extent that if the kind of the theory of change, I will say, is that in an event that all communities will have registered their land and they know the boundaries defined by either mountains or rivers, then there's more processes that need to be invested in these. One of these processes is actually community-based natural resource plans, which community can map their resources and also how utilization. But also, communities can enter into agreement partnerships with other communities so that we know their transboundary resources. So, but this can only happen when each and every community in Kenya has registered their land. It will minimize conflicts, because the conflicts are actually about certain historical processes that have happened without the influence or the participation of the communities. So communities are trying to actually also solve those issues, but also I think that the government, also through the National Land Commission, is also addressing the whole question about historical land injustices. But to me, one way to minimize conflict, the full implementation of community land will help in minimizing conflict between communities, neighboring communities. Secondly, it will give communities much more power in control of their natural resources, but also when it comes to government wanting land or any other investment within those lands, there is a set up procedure in which they can now engage with the communities, seeking what we call free, prior, informed consent. You enter into that kind of process. They agree through their community land assemblies and that. And then the other thing is, let's not forget that there are a number of things that are coming positive from these areas. There's global studies showing that community lands globally are holding so much of heritage, so much of biodiversity, and they're actually key to climate change solutions. And further fragmentation of community lands will end up into a very skewed kind of land use, especially in Kenya, where most of these areas are arid. They are not arid because they are useless, they are arid because of the nature of the landscape. Right. But they are also much more than that, actually. So to me, will be more or less 70% solving the conflict of land if we fully support the process. And I will come to that when it comes to discuss
Yes.
All right, go ahead, yeah.
Yes, thank you. I think what I wanted to add is the issue of civic education and public education about the Act, because there are quite a number of issues that are emerging, especially challenges on the ground, where we have resistance from the communities. I remember the last time when this issue was being handled in Isiolo. It was basically people took each other to court, they refused, and then this process delayed, and I think Isiolo was the last county that was handled in this. So there's quite a lot of misinformation and the community resisting because of lack of information. I think we've already talked about the issue of trust. And most communities think that maybe they're not safe with the county governments because of what happened before during the former county council regime. Of course, the issue of threat to their livelihood is one of the other issues that is also coming up, because we are looking at, we are pastoralists, our livelihood is pastoralism. So basically, if this land is registered, and this is a whole range land management from one corner to the other part of the county, and yet now, if it is now registered in bits and pieces, then what happens in land use and range land management in terms of our livestock keeping, and that is also threatened, and then communities keep on asking, what do we do on that? Lastly, I think the issue of mega government projects that are coming, and that's the reason why, for example, as a National Land Commission, we'd want this land to be registered, basically, because if it is not registered again, then that again goes to the disadvantage of the community, because you can't pay, you can't compensate basically land that has no documentation. So at the end of the day, despite the fact that we have a lot of land, then again we don't benefit as communities.
I would just, let me just add one point on
in 10 seconds, go ahead.
Yes, 10 seconds.
Yes.
On this point about sensitization and public education, I think the government has got it very wrong, because having a meeting at the county headquarters or sub-county headquarters is not public education. It's not public sensitization.
All right.
The communities live 200, 300 kilometers away from the county headquarters, and you organize one meeting at the county headquarters, one meeting with few people in sub-county headquarters, and assuming that communities have been educated and sensitized is actually part of the problem.
Fair enough.
Just to add
I'll give you a chance when we come back from the break. I understand we need to take a short break. Remember, we are talking about community land in reference to the 2016 enacted Community Land Act. Stay with us. This discussion will be back after this break.
watching TV47. Entrepreneurs around the country are creatively grinding.
I started with a borrowed phone.
A borrowed phone?
Yeah, that could last 2 hours with charge.
We just have to do quality work for them.
To make their mark in an unpredictable market.
It was now going on a sales venture, looking for stockists door to door.
On the grind, we bring you their stories so you can tell yours. Every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Men are known to be the pillars.
We're rising up together.
Say your point.
You need an alpha male now to come and help you and your girl.
Anaongea zero.
And women, they are the cornerstone that hold the pillars.
Don't be entitled. A man is peaceful, a man who's allowed to talk to a lady.
This November, the Men's Conference brings a cocktail of diverse ladies to weigh in on various matters.
Something I'd love more to see is men being able to exist as themselves.
Tune in every Wednesday at 10 p.m.
Hello guys, and welcome to Night In with Joy Irungu. Joy Irungu. Joy Irungu.
Heartbreak, pain, and tears have been a major part of Night In Season 1.
Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Let's get back to our discussion. Just a reminder that we are talking of community land rights. Just so before we went for a break, we are talking of the question of participation, and more so among communities.
Yes, participation is actually a wonderful thing that solves all these challenges around inclusion, all these issues about conflict. The law is very strong. The regulation has a very strong backup to ensure that all these things are avoided if participation are actually done in a proper way. I think the participation from the experience, the way we are seeing, is just done to fulfill the requirement of the law. Actually, no participation is taking place, because participation is not about bringing people to the hotel and having them just sign register, but it's getting people to participate and understand and really get to know their right as provided in the Act.
Fair enough. Let me bring in Eileen to the discussion. We are talking of participation. Let me ask you this. In your view, are the people, communities who this Act and this law is set to govern, already is governing, are they aware of the requisite knowledge of that Act?
Thanks, Abubakar. I think communities are aware, but not adequately. There's been a lot of efforts from non-state actors to support community sensitization. But I think the efforts still need to move beyond just sensitization to being able to support these communities to then leverage and then actually use this law. And that's exactly what we as an institution are about. Because it's one thing to know the law, but it's also another thing to be able to use this law to be able to go through the registration process. And so there've been efforts. These efforts in many cases are not very coordinated. And so there's a gap in terms of coordination of efforts to sensitize communities. And then the efforts are not adequate. These communities are spread across the country. They are vast. If you look at Marsabit, for instance, it's a very large county. So being able to traverse the county to reach, including the very small communities that equally need to know this law so that they are not left behind is a process. Yeah.
All right, Mali, we are talking of land, and often the question is the use of that land or the misuse of that land. Let's stick to the use of that land. Are communities therefore putting to best use this land that we are even talking about?
Yeah, certainly. I think pastoral livelihood. First of all, I think we need to demystify the fact that there are not only pastoralists who have community lands, there are other communities that are also practicing other forms of livelihood. But also, as far as if you look into the pastoral livelihood, their traditional livelihood system allowed them to sustainably use that land because they will move from one area to the other. there are so many impediments to that, to the extent that they are not using that. There are so many things, other forms of land use systems that are considered as more superior than the pastoral systems. A good example, there are a number of them that all of us know. We are a country that prides ourselves on agriculture as a backbone. But not knowing that pastoral systems also is a food system. We are not just seeing land. That's a food system. Pastoral system is a food system, it's an identity, it's a cultural. And that's the only thing that can thrive in a dry lands. So for me, there's a huge resource within the pastoral setup and other traditional communities in terms of traditional knowledge. But at least they need right now other technologies. There's evidence to suggest that we need to complement traditional knowledge, traditional livelihood system with other complementary livelihood systems in order for us to lead a thriving livelihood in the thriving ecosystems. So this is what we are talking about. So in the act itself, it provides for communities to come up with their natural resource use plans. They can map their resources, this area for grazing, this area for other kind. If they want a conservancy, they can set that and do it the way they want. So there is an opportunity for these communities to manage their own resources sustainable, but it requires an investment, just the way we invest in education for the future.
All right.
But people expect pastoralism or community land to be an end in itself. It's not. There's so much that needs to be put in terms of, and we need to also know and compare that certain countries are much more arid than northern Kenya.
All right.
Can I add just one point on pastoralism, Abu? This is the point about debate about pastoralism and dry land. It is very clear, it's scientifically proven that pastoralism is the most viable enterprise investment you can do in dry land areas. Unless you get oil or you get huge mineral deposit, there is no other enterprise that can give you that level of return on arid lands. This is one thing. But the problem is the government policy and investment plan. All the counties in our region, all of them are saying our area is arid, livestock is our mainstay, but none of them are investing even 5% of the budget. In fact, in one of the counties in our area, there is more money being put into developing fish pond than going to the livestock.
All right, let me bring in Tia to the discussion. You wanted to react to what we were discussing. Go ahead.
Yes. I think even classification of this land, community land, especially in northern Kenya, put the area into a disadvantage, because I think you remember during colonial time, where, for example, we've been said to be, in NFD, we are Northern Frontier, whatever, and then basically the area was still like unproductive, a no-go zone, insecurity area, areas that are very difficult in terms of logistics, hard to reach areas that people are doing things that are not very viable in Kenya, because people don't see livestock production as an investment as such. So, and government is not putting a lot of money into it. So, so basically by even classifying, the area as a non-productive area has also been one big issue that has affected community land also registration, and also putting the community to a disadvantage.
All right, let me bring in.
Just to add, Abu, on Matia's
briefly
point.
As I bring in
just one point. Just one point. What she said is true in terms of the policy, the way policy has marginalized the area. For example, take an issue of wildlife. Wildlife is a community wealth, just like domestic. But if you look at it, it is not even linked to the whole livelihood that the communities are managing. It is now through these community conservation, new initiatives, that communities are trying to regain and rediscover that actually wildlife in that area is a community wealth. And they have now to start accounting and protecting it. There's at some time they were disconnected completely from their own wealth.
All right, and because of the interest of time, probably I can ask one last question to each. And let me start with Eileen. We are talking of land. Often in a layman's language, we evaluate land, say this acre is this much. Can communities value their land? Say community X says their land is worth 50 billion, 100 billion shillings?
Yes, why not? I mean, these are assets. These are everything to these communities. They know their acreage, they know their sizes, they know even the natural resources that are on these lands.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you talk about natural resources, not just purely around minerals. Most of these lands are endowed with, you know, the most valuable traditional, you know, medicinal plants that you can't get anywhere. And so these people are able to value each and every natural resources that are on their land. They're able to value their livelihood, which is pastoralism, the hunters and gatherers. And so nothing stops communities from being able to value that land. But I think in valuing this land, we must not equate valuing this land to commodification of these lands, because then we push the discussion to aspects that then encourage fragmentation, which is something that threatens pastoralism, threatens communities' lives and livelihoods in most of these communities. So sure, they are able to do that.
All right.
Just to add one point, the law is the problem in this particular area of valuation. Because if you look at the land value index law, the way they look at how to value the land actually is completely inappropriate to the situation of the pastoral land and rangelands.
All right, Mali, we are having this discussion ahead of the first ever Community Land Summit, which will be held in Nyanyuki next week. What do you expect? What do you seek to attain from holding this summit?
Yes. First of all, I think what we want to bring the divergent voices together. As mentioned by Eileen, there are a number of efforts. Disjointed efforts, and we want to understand who is doing what, where, and how, so that we can have a kind of a forge. The whole question is, we cannot achieve this individually. We need to forge a way forward.
Right.
So we bring actors together, government, non-government organization, stakeholders, also financial partners, but also governmental institutions. So all of us can agree on how to move forward, because it's of essence for us to register these lands and to support the communities so that at least what we've been saying here can be achieved.
All right, here as well.
Thank you. I think this summit basically is bringing together all players, including National Land Commission and other researchers. People have been doing a lot of work in these areas. We have community members who have, experiences around land use planning, all the issues around conflict, challenges that they are seeing ahead of registration, the kind of budget they would require for this thing to be actualized, some of the bottlenecks around community registration, even at a starting point, and basically commitment and goodwill from government, national government included, and also county governments in terms of pushing and ensuring that this process is working. The process is quite low. I'm sure from the time it began up to this time, we are looking back 5 years back, just seeing what progress have we made so far. And I think we'll be hearing voices from women, youth. We are hearing from development partners. We are hearing from government agencies like National Land Commission and the rest of, so that at least we can now consolidate and then see how best we can now help the communities move forward and ensure that this process of community land registration is done, because it's one of the things that the communities are also yearning for. Basically, lack of land registration documentation, community land tender system is a big issue. Even as I said earlier, for example, the mega government projects are coming to northern Kenya. Like now, we've launched the Horn of Africa Gateway project, which is a big road, the first time ever, longest road that will be done by Kenya from Isiolo to Mandera, which is about 774 kilometers. And that is cross-cutting across the northern part of Kenya. And we want to see how that would also affect and how that will improve life of communities, especially in shopping centers which has no documentation where the road is passing. They've been told that there's 60 meters of road that has already been gazetted in 1974, which community is not even aware. They've already put up big structures in the area that already been gazetted. So basically, that is all the things that we also see how that will play out, how this road will bring advantage to community where we'd expect non-state actors to be doing lobbying, so that at least they ensure that at least adjudication is done and money is allocated by national government, just to ensure that also pastoralists take advantage of some of this program.
And finally, perhaps, Jaso, what do you intend to achieve from this summit? Same question.
My colleagues have said this, but in summary, we intend to take a break those 3 days and reflect, and take an opportunity for those days to really, for actors to engage each other and take stock of the progress we have made 5 years down the line since the Act is in place. And as Commissioner Tia and Mali have said, review and try to see what are the issues. How much have we progressed? Why is the progress that much? And what are things we can do over the next 5 years so that we will be able to progress better or make much more progress than we have achieved for the last 5 years. Of course, it's the foundation here. There's a lot of learning curve, and we take these lessons into context and be able now to develop a framework for collaborative approach towards now accelerating the implementation and registering of community lands over the next 5 years.
All right, Jaso Moku is the CEO of the Pastoralist Parliamentary Group. Eileen Wakesho is the Community Land Protection Advisor. Mali Ole